Yes. Hello. Oh, y'all seem tired tonight. Come on, it's Thursday night. It's 7 o'clock. We're alive, right? Well, it's good to see you. I want to say thanks again to our team, Chad, Ariel. You guys are killing it. I thought Chad got out there with the acoustic guitar. I thought we were going to have a slow kind of melodic song. That was a rock show. Absolutely amazing. And then Liz, of course, every time she sings, brings the house down. Well, hey, this weekend is MLK weekend, and it's a holiday weekend that we're celebrating all over, and just what a great time to just pause and to remember. You know, I'm going to butcher his quote because I wasn't planning to say it, but Martin Luther King made a quote, and he said that Sunday was the most segregated place in the country. And I'm so glad to say that at least for our church, that is not the case at all. And I think that is amazing, absolutely amazing. We thank God for that. And so we celebrate Martin Luther King and the unity he brought and the heart of service that he brought to the table. Well, we're in a series right now called Blueprint. Last week, April did a phenomenal job talking about purpose and helping move us forward. What a great way it was to start the new year. And tonight, we're going to jump into another topic that kind of comes in line with this idea of trying to make a plan, a blueprint, if you will, as we're navigating a new year and as we're navigating the things that are coming our way. And so what I want to lean into tonight, in fact, let's do it this way. Let me ask you a question. I don't want you to raise your hand. I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to think. How many of us find ourselves right now in a season of uncertainty? A season of uncertainty. Just think about it for just a quick second. Does something pop to your mind? Could be career, could be relational, could be financial, could be just something that's around the corner and you're not sure. I think it's safe to say a lot of us go through seasons of uncertainty. I know for me, I have absolutely been on many different whirlwind seasons of uncertainty. I think of times, I'll name a few, I think of times when we were trying to buy our home when we moved here and wondering, are we going to close? And is this going to happen? Or was the rug going to get yanked out from underneath us? I remember seasons, especially for Sarah and I early on in marriage, where we were wondering, are we going to have enough money to pay the bills? Are we going to be able to survive if we take this job and move this direction? I remember with my wife, Sarah, I remember asking her parents if I could marry her and really uncertain what their answer would be. You would think you'd go in there knowing what they're going to say, but the truth was there was some uncertainty in that idea. I think it's safe to say for all of us, we face uncertainty. Maybe for you, I think there's two layers. There's a small sense of uncertainty. There's big senses of uncertainty. Small might be, hey, I hope this new employee we just hired works out. Or, hey, I hope my kid one day will learn what I mean when I say clean your room, right? Wouldn't that be great? Or hey, are we sure or not sure the Texans are going to win the Super Bowl? I mean, that one is probably more certain than others, but we have little things, right, that we go through and we can be uncertain about, but then there's big things, big things, that at times, if we're honest, can even be crippling. Is this spot going to be cancerous? Are we going to get foreclosed on our home before we can pay that mortgage payment? Is my kid okay? Haven't heard from them in a while. I lost my job and man, this is going to be tough. Is my spouse okay? Is my spouse having an affair? And we can start to wrestle with some areas of life that are uncertain. And at times it can even be crippling. And so my hope tonight is to just encourage us, give you some thoughts that might be helpful when you find yourself facing a season of uncertainty. And I think the best way, the safest way for us to begin is to look at the Bible and to see moments and seasons of uncertainty because they're all throughout the scriptures. In fact, a couple of quick ones that come to mind, I think about Mary and Joseph, right? We just celebrated Christmas, and you likely heard the Christmas story many times, hopefully read it together, maybe even as a family. But you think about Mary and Joseph finding out that they are going to birth the Son of God. There had to have been a ton of uncertainty wrapped up into that moment and all that would come with it. I think about David, who stood toe-to-toe with Goliath. A little bit of uncertainty in that moment. What's going to happen? Do I have what I need to take this guy out? I think about Moses, who led the people of Israel through the wilderness and so many opportunities and yet challenges that they faced, moments where they weren't sure, are we going the right way? Is this the right plan? Are we going to have what we need? And so we see uncertainty all throughout the Bible, but there's two guys in particular that came to my mind as I was thinking about what we could talk about tonight and how this could be helpful. And I thought of two guys that you might actually be familiar with if you've been around the church even just a little bit. It's two guys, one guy named Joseph and one guy named Job. Now, these two guys are very, very familiar if you've been around the church world because they've had some very difficult challenges that they face in life. And oftentimes we look at their stories and we look at it from when you're going through a hard time, here's an encouragement. But the other angle of this is they went through lots of seasons of uncertainty, not knowing what was going to come next. And I think it's helpful for us to learn from some others first before we look inside and figure out how we could potentially navigate that season of uncertainty you might be going through right now. And so I want to do a bit of a contrast, if you will, to Joseph and Job. Now, first big picture, Joseph had all kinds of moments of uncertainty, but his story is unique because and we'll show this in just a second, as he navigated through these moments of uncertainty, God was using each little moment to do something. He was moving him and positioning him. It's quite interesting. He couldn't see it, but God was working. But our other friend, Job, well, for Job, his situations were uncertain, and yet they just kept compiling on top of one another. And sometimes it looks like that for us. Man, it just seems like we keep getting hit and we don't know when it's going to stop or where we're supposed to go. So let's recap these two guys in case you're not familiar with them, which is likely for some not a problem. Let's do this. So first of all, I want you to see that their stories can be found in Scripture. Joseph's story in Genesis 37 through 50, but as you can tell, that's chapters, by the way, not verses. So I thought it would be helpful for you to not read all of those. Is that fair? Did I assume correctly? Okay. Some of you are like, I'm fine. We got nowhere to go tonight. We're good. A lot of us have kids, so we got to get them to bed, okay? And then Job's story really is the entire book of Job, which is actually quite long. So I think you'll thank me at the end for just bringing you the highlights. But I do encourage you, if you find yourself in this season, both of these stories could be tremendously helpful. And so if you're looking for something to read on your own over the next couple weeks, either of these or both of these could be wonderful. So let's look at Joseph first. I want to highlight a couple of the things that happened to Joseph so we can lean into his story and get a perspective that I think will be helpful for us. So one of the first things that we learn about in Joseph's story right around Genesis 37 is we learn that Joseph's brothers decide to sell him off into slavery, which if you've never heard this story, that sounds extremely harsh, but previously they were planning to kill him. So it actually ended up being a bit better than what they were planning to do. And so Joseph's story starts off in a rocky place. He's sold off into slavery. He ends up in someone's home working as a servant. However, as we're hearing, God was working through Joseph and working through these moments, and he worked well, and he had a great work ethic about him, and he was helpful, and he was fair, and so he moved his way up to be one of the top servants in the home. And then, unfortunately, he has an encounter with the wife of the master of the home, and he is falsely, and the key word is falsely, accused of raping, or at least attempting to rape the master's wife. And of course, the master's angry, and so sends him off into jail. While he's in jail, he encounters a few different folks, but there is a particular guy that he's able to help out, and he says, hey, I'm going to help you out here. You're about to get out. Do me a favor. Just send a good word out for me and see if maybe you could help me get out too. But unfortunately, that gentleman forgets him until a little bit later on. However, throughout the whole process of Joseph's story, one of the key elements is that he's been separated from his family. Now, some of his brothers were a little messed up, the ones that sold him into slavery, but he really did love his family, and particularly his parents and his younger siblings. And so there is a lot of challenge that we see throughout Joseph's story in the Bible. Joseph is constantly encountering these moments where he goes, I don't understand what is happening. Why is this happening? What in the world is God doing? Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now. But then there's another guy, our friend Job. Job's story is a bit unique in that it just keeps getting worse. First, we learn that Job, through a couple different series of events, loses all of his wealth and all of his possessions, and he was a very wealthy man at his time and in his day. It's a combination of people stealing from him and a massive fire that takes all of his possessions and all of his wealth. That'd be terrible, right? Then, all 10 of his children are killed in essentially what we could describe as a tornado. A massive tornado comes through, tears up the building or the home that they're in, and all 10 die. It almost sounds so extreme that it doesn't hit us the same, right? You're like, oh, 10 kids, they all died. Wow, that's crazy, right? It is a wild journey. And then, towards the end of his story, we learn about all of these physical ailments that he goes through, from sores and painful things, crippling things. He is devastated in all ways, and yet it just seems to keep compiling one on top of the other. And really, that sickness, that debilitating feeling, is navigating through most of his story. Job finds himself in these moments of uncertainty, looking at his situation and wanting to look ahead, yet uncertain, is this ever going to end? But from both of their stories, we see an interesting and I think important principle. For Joseph, God was leading him to an important place. God was maneuvering Joseph through all of these obstacles that he did not allow Joseph to know what he was doing. God was moving him to where eventually he would place him, if you're familiar with the story, you know, he will place him in a position where he was the second in charge over Egypt, and he's able to save not only the people of Egypt, but his own family from starving because of God's wisdom and his position. But he would have never been in that position if he hadn't gone through the twists and the turns that God allowed him to go through. But for our other friend Job, as these things kept compiling, and the good news, if you haven't heard the story of Job, in the very, very end, God is able to restore him, and it's wonderful, but most of his journey is extremely painful. And I know there's probably some of us here tonight where that's our journey. We are in pain right now. There is uncertainty. But listen, what God was doing with Job was a whole nother thing. God was refining and strengthening Job's faith. Listen, there will be seasons of our life where God is just maneuvering in the background and we don't know quite what he's doing, but he's doing something and we got to trust him. And then there are also some seasons where that uncertainty is wrapped up in that God is using these opportunities, not always his. Sometimes it's other people doing things to you, and yet God steps in and says, I'm going to use this for my good and for my glory. And God uses these opportunities, these moments of uncertainty, to build our faith, our trust, and our hope in him. And so becomes the question, okay, that's great. Joseph and Job both eventually made it through. They went through a great uncertainty. So what about us? What about me? What about you? Maybe again, right now, you're in a season of uncertainty. You have questions that you wish you had answers to. Well, I'm going to give you a couple of thoughts. I think things that we could remember as we enter into seasons of uncertainty, and I think this is going to be helpful. Here's the first thing I want you to remember. We live in a broken world. What does that mean? That means that if you have decided to become a Christ follower, you have given your life to him, we are not immune to the challenges of life, relationally, financially, career, and all things in between. Because we live in a broken world, all people, including those that are Christ followers, do encounter seasons of unknown and of challenge. And yet the difference, for those of you that are wondering, what was the whole point of this? I thought following Christ, everything got better. The difference now is we have someone walking with us through them. We have someone holding us up in those times when we need that support. But we live in a broken world. It's helpful to understand that, particularly when we face times of uncertainty. Here's the second thing. Our faith grows through being tested. Listen, if you want your faith to grow, the hard part, and by the way, I don't necessarily recommend that prayer. Be careful with it. Because if you want your faith to grow, what really has to happen is you've got to be pushed to a place where you can no longer handle it on your own. And the only option is for God to intervene and to make that situation work out. So then afterwards you can look back. Whoa, that was intense. This was the moment. Were you paying attention? That was it. Because in those moments, when you look back, do you know what you find? You go, wait a minute, there was this thing in my life that I never thought would work. I never could see how that was gonna pan out, and yet God delivered. If God can deliver there, I believe he can get me through this. So our faith is grown when we're tested, and you're like, that's terrible news for some of us, because we don't wanna go through that. It's just like working out. Do you know how many people were in my way today at the gym? A whole lot. That won't be there next week, and I'm not judging. It's cool, it's good, but it was busy. It's inconvenient. But you know what you got to do if you're serious, if you're one of those? Listen, I welcome you, but stick with it, because it won't work. If you're not pumping or running, or I'm going to stop there, whatever you do, it's not going to work if you don't put in the work. Why? Because we got to push beyond. The muscles have to be broken so that they can be brought back, and when they rebuild, they're stronger than they were before. Our faith is built and strengthened and refined when we are tested. Sometimes your seasons of uncertainty are God going, this is when I just need you to trust me and watch me work. There's one more. We have a limited perspective. You and I, unfortunately, and I do say unfortunately because I wish it wasn't this way, but you and I, we have finite minds. We have a finite view on what's happening in this massive world where God is overseeing everything. We only see a small picture. I mean, this happens with our kids, right? We see our kids and they say, oh, Dad, can I please have one more piece of candy? And you're like, no. Actually, I'll tell you a better story. We went on vacation one time, and there was a little candy shop, and we said, yeah, we're on vacation. Let the kids eat whatever they want. It's great. It'll be fine. What do you think happened? Yes, they both were sick for a whole day. We know what they don't know, that yes, that candy looks good today, but it won't look good tomorrow, and I'll leave it at that, all right? It's not good. So we have, in a similar way, a finite view of some of the things that God is working on. You think about Joseph. Joseph had no idea that all of these twists and these turns that didn't make sense were going to lead him to a position where he could save his family's life. Sometimes God's just working and we don't always see the full picture. It's why we must trust. Leads me to a great verse that it's worth just attention here really quick. Proverbs 3, 5-6. Very, very familiar verse if you've been around the church. Listen to what it says. Trust the Lord with what? With all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, your limited perspective. In all your ways. Submit to him. What's that mean? I'm going to come under so God can be over. I'm going to surrender so that God can be in control. Submit to him and he will make your path straight. And I just want to point something out. Notice, make your path straight. To see that into fruition, you still must move forward. See, sometimes we clam up in uncertainty and we just kind of stop. We pause. And the truth is, we keep moving slowly and trust that God will lead us where he desires for us to go. You remember the great song, Jesus Take the Wheel? Right? Don't actually let that happen while you're driving, but what great idea. As you're moving forward, then you say, God, okay, you take control. You navigate wherever you want me to go. Wherever you want me to go, that's where I want to go, even if I don't know where you're taking me yet. I remember for Sarah and I, for my family, one of the biggest probably moments of uncertainty, if I had to think about all the things we've been through, was actually not too long ago. It was a season where I felt God was removing me from the church that I had previously been serving at for 13 years and was calling me into something new. Fast forward, it would be here, but we're not there yet, so back up. So he was calling me into something new, and it was a bit crazy. I'd been at that church for 13 years. Great church, great people, great relationships. My kids were settled in school. We were, as a family, were settled in the neighborhood, in the area. We had made friends. Everything was good. And yet it felt like God was starting to stir. God was starting to move. And it was real tough because I didn't know where we were going to go. I didn't quite even know what we were going to do, what role I would take. At the time, if I'm just honest, all the jobs that were available were up north where it's cold. By the way, my wife is so faithful and she's amazing. So I will follow you wherever the Lord leads. But she did tell me, if the Lord leads us to a place that's cold, I just want to say I don't think it's him leading you. And I thought, okay, I'm eliminating 36 options off the table right now. Anyways, I digress. But in this season, man, it was a crazy season of feeling stuff happening, but so uncertain what was to happen. And I learned some things, and I just wanted to add this on tonight. I think this might be helpful for you, I hope. But I learned a couple things in that process of navigating true uncertainty that affected my entire family, potentially my ministry, my career. There's a couple things I learned. Here's one. This is a tip. I hear no better than I hear yes. So think about this for a second. Throughout the process, I was looking at different opportunities, and there just wasn't, even with River Pointe, I'm just gonna be honest, there wasn't this like doors wide open, green light, flashing lights, bing, 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 go that way. I never had that. But I had tons of clear no's. Whether the door was closed because they weren't interested, or as I started to move forward, something just didn't feel right, didn't sit right. And so I learned a valuable lesson for me. I hear no better than I hear yes. So I do not usually look for a massive glowing green sign for those of us that are uncertain about what you're supposed to do with your particular situation. But I do listen for the no's. And typically what I found and how I ended up here at River Pointe was I realized that the no's were fading away. And as they were fading away, I just slowly kept moving. It was a long process. I did a lot of interviews. I'm not quite sure how I feel about that, but that's okay. But eventually, as we slowly moved forward, it was this, is there a big no? There's not. Okay, God, we're going to jump in and take a chance. I hear no better than I hear yes. That might be helpful for you. Here's number 2. And this is not new news. Excess worry and anxiety cloud my judgment, and I'm sure they cloud yours. Now, why that's important, I know that's not new information, but here's the thing. When you're in a season of uncertainty and you let anxiety and worry, and I know it's hard to control that, we can lay it on the Lord, ask him to take it from us, but when anxiety and worry take over, we do not think clearly. And when we're not thinking clearly, we typically end up in trouble. And so, as hard as it may be just simply slowing down in that season of uncertainty and making sure that God is working and that you're not jumping the gun. Be careful with this. Next one. No, 2 more, and we're done. Resisting change is easy, but not always best. So, for me, actually, my personality loves change. I don't know if this surprises you or no, as y'all are getting to know me. I actually love change. I love blowing stuff up. I love tweaking, not like, you know what I'm saying. I like moving things around. I'd move my team to a new position every week if I could. There's something in me that just likes change, thinks it's good, and you can call me crazy for those that don't like change. I know you're out there. I know who you are. It's okay. But for me, with this particular situation, the hardest part was thinking I have built so many wonderful relationships with people over 13 years. People that call me their pastor, that look to me for guidance and encouragement, that I look to for mentoring and for walking through life. And the thought of changing that was really scary. It was uncertain. It didn't make sense. And so there's a natural thing in us when we find uncertainty that we go, ooh, I'm going to stay away from that. Ooh, I'm not sure, because that requires change. But sometimes change is good. Sometimes change is exactly what needs to happen. And can I tell you, change was exactly what God needed to do in our world. But man, was it a journey. Here's the last thing I learned. This is for me. It may not be for you, but I bet you it is. I tend to force or rush things. Anybody else? Am I the only one? Liars. That's cool. It's not Sunday. You can lie in church. It's cool. I tend to force or rush things. So, like I told you, I don't mind a little bit of change. Once my eyes locked on something, I'm gone. It's over. We're doing it. But what happens sometimes, listen, what happens sometimes when we're in the middle of uncertainty, or in a season where it's a little bit more like Joseph, where God's doing a bunch of things behind the scenes and he doesn't want us to jump the gun. So let me give you an example. I found in this season for us, in this transition, that there were two different phases of a transition. There's the release phase and the send phase. The release phase and the send phase. The release phase was first. I felt God stirring in me that change was coming. This was nearing. I remember, it was a year later when we left, but I remember the Christmas before. I told some people that I really trusted that were on that team with me, I said, this is going to be my last Christmas here. It wasn't for maybe 8 or 9 months later that I actually began to make a move, but I could just sense, but it wasn't time to go yet. There was a difference between the release and the send. Here's what's crazy. If I, in the release, jumped the gun or forced it, guess what would have happened? I would have missed out on the opportunity to come here. Because the Missouri City campus didn't need a lead pastor or a campus pastor at that time of the release. They needed it at the time of the send. And if I had jumped the gun of the send to get into the release, I would have missed out on the opportunity and probably landed somewhere I wasn't supposed to. So we have to be careful in their seasons of uncertainty that we don't jump the gun or force something because we're a little uncomfortable. We play God. We kind of take over. Hope this works. Okay, I'm out. And it can be dangerous. But can I tell you something just to circle it all up? The process was wild and uncertain, but oh my goodness, has God been so good? Has God placed us in, I'm telling you, I didn't think my family could be in a better spot as far as neighborhood and friends, and it is 10 times better. I didn't think I could be more useful at a church than where I was. I was doing so many things, and yet it has been unbelievable how God's been able to use a whole different set of gifts since I've been here. It's been amazing. And so in our seasons of uncertainty, I just want to encourage you, be patient. Now, that had to do with the moving, kind of like Joseph. What about for those of you that it just seems like things are piling on and piling on and piling on and it just doesn't seem enough? It's possible. It's possible. God's doing some true growing in you. He is strengthening you. He is asking you to trust him so that you can be prepared for more. He's putting you in the fire, but the fire is to refine. Now, I know that's not encouraging. I get it. But if we have hope and faith in God and who he is, we walk through those fires and we come out refined on the other side. We come out strengthened on the other side. We come out stronger on the other side. And then we look back and go, if God can get me through that, he's going to get me through this. Absolutely no problem. So what's our hope? What's our hope in uncertainty? Our hope is this, that God is working and that he is bigger than this world that we are in. What he sees, how he moves, his power, his vision, if you want to give it a modern word, is bigger than this world. And so our hope, listen, and I know for those of you in Job moments, can I just come back to this for a second? For those of you in the Job moments, listen, I have hope for you that God's going to bring you to the end like Job did, and he's going to circle this thing up. But even if he doesn't, as Christ followers, we can have hope in pain and uncertainty because we know that first, because of Jesus Christ on the cross, we are saved and made new creations. But then two, and we sang about it earlier, it was beautiful. There's a place for us in perfect paradise, heaven, waiting. So even if it doesn't all come together here, what's waiting for us is better. But thank God that he cares enough to lean into where we are right now and refine us and to move us around so he can position us just right. So if you're facing a season of uncertainty, be patient. Look to God. Take a few steps and let him to guide your path and trust him. Trust him because he has wisdom that you and I don't. And God is at work. Let me pray for you. Father, we love